All right, class, let's go ahead and wrap up the 1950s and talk about the second Red Scare that happens in American culture. That coincides with the rise of the Cold War. Essentially, the second Red Scare, as we call it, there had been a period of time after the First World War when we saw a rise of communism or fear of communism and communists in America following the Russian Revolution. The 1950s are going to see a revival of anti-communist sentiment at home. This is directly tied to American foreign policy, as we talked about. Remember, any communist is a bad communist. And so if you have a neighbor that is talking about labor unions, if you have a neighbor that's complaining about the government, if you have a neighbor that's talking about challenging civil rights politics or challenging laws that establish white supremacy on issues. If you have friends who are civil rights activists, these may be communists in your life, and you need to keep an eye on them because a good American doesn't want to change the status quo because we're the best country in the world. Essentially, we have a fear of communist infiltration in this country. This is going to kick off with Executive Order 9835, which will demand that every federal employee in the United States government take a loyalty oath to the government. This is seen as a means to prevent spying or infiltration. It's honestly un-American to ask somebody to take a loyalty oath such as this, but we're going to do it anyway. We're also going to see this as a conservative attempt to gain power in this country, and it's going to, by and large, be successful. Democrats had been in control since the election of Roosevelt in 1932, and conservative Republicans and conservatives across the board, we still haven't gotten to that switch, and I'll talk about this next week, where we fully see the place switch between Republicans and Democrats on where they stand politically. Conservatives are trying to attain power. We need to keep America as it is because this is the best possible nation on the face of the earth. We need to maintain power through fear. If our liberal opponents gain power, they're going to let labor unions win. They're going to push for civil rights legislation, and that's all part of the communist agenda. We need to keep America the status quo as it is because we already are the greatest nation on the face of the earth. What we're going to see also are the rise of a couple of governmental bodies that will really help spread this fear throughout American culture. In 1938, Congress had established the House Un-American Activities Committee. It was designed to hold hearings occasionally to help prevent or to help gain information about organizations that were not necessarily just communist, but things that they were doing things that went against the American way of life. In 1947, HUAC will have will basically begin another series of hearings determined to look into communist infiltration in the United States. We're going to hear testimony on how labor unions are rife with communist infiltrators. But what's really going to come out of the HUAC hearings, and I want to just take a moment, remember House Un-American Activity Committee, because people get this mixed up with the next step all the time. The House is going to hear 9 days of hearings about how especially Hollywood is going to be infiltrated with communists. And eventually what's going to come out of this, Ronald Reagan, pictured here, is the head of the Hollywood the Screen Actors Guild, which is essentially the Screen Actors Union. Reagan is going to throw anybody and everybody under the bus who may or may not be communist in his union as a way of concentrating his power in the actors union. And this is essentially going to be the beginning of his political career. He is going to turn in lists of names of potential communists to the House committee. And several of these are going to, basically anybody that gets turned in by Reagan is going to be blacklisted. There are going to be prominent actors, writers, directors whose careers will end because Hollywood studios will refuse to hire anybody on the blacklist ever again. If I sound judgmental about this, I am. I will make no bones about the fact that this is something I was raised to view the American way of life, that this is something you did not do, that America had freedom of political assembly, freedom of belief, freedom of thought. And essentially, what we're talking about with the Red Scare is a period of time where if you wanted to form a labor union to get better negotiating power, to get better wages, to get health insurance, you were seen as a communist. If you went to one Communist Party meeting, and that's actually the case with several of the people on the Hollywood blacklist, they only went to one meeting early in the 1940s, or one or two meetings, and never went back again. Their careers were ruined because they were curious about a political and ideological function and attended. That's not the America I was raised to believe in. That's why I sound judgmental on this. And I'll leave it there. I'm going to end that thought there. But that's the House Un-American Activities Committee. They're going to be most famous for going after Hollywood, but they're going to attempt to ferret out communist activities in America in defense of American ideology. The bigger threat, and the one we remember more, people confuse Joe McCarthy with HUAC all the time. Joe McCarthy was a senator from Wisconsin, so he is not on the House Un-American Activities Committee. Joe McCarthy is a minor senator from Wisconsin. He's a World War II vet. He has been elected to the Senate. He doesn't sit on any major boards. He's a Republican. In essence, he's going to come out in 1953, 1954 with a list, claiming to have a list of 205 known communists who were working in the State Department, who had infiltrated our very body of foreign policy and interaction with the globe. Joe McCarthy will never actually put forward this list. No one will ever actually see a full copy of the list of names that he claims to have. Nevertheless, he will hold a hearing into these potential communists infiltrating in the State Department. He will find a few. There will be a few people who will lose their jobs over potential political belief or former political belief. That will reinforce McCarthy's power. Ultimately, what is going to bring McCarthy's power to a head and what is going to be his downfall will be the Army McCarthy hearings. On the minor success of attempting to have a witch hunt in the State Department, McCarthy will go on to claim that there are hundreds of communists in the military and especially in high-ranking military positions. He will hold Senate hearings to try and ferret these people out. Ultimately, he will go on rambling tirades. He will badger witnesses. Um, Ultimately, he'll actually be called on the carpet by one of the defense attorneys saying, have you no shame, sir, for looking for communists and trying to ferret out people for their political beliefs." He'll also famously take on Edward R. Murrow, the most famous news reporter of his day, in a series of head-to-head TV interviews, claiming that there are communists in the media. McCarthy will fall flat on his face. The only thing that's going to come out of this is a ruined reputation for McCarthy as a drunk. He's actually drunk on TV when he's talking in one of his interviews with Edward R. Murrow. He's an alcoholic, and this will become publicly known. His political career will be ruined, but not before we have this great red baiting scare of a series of years in the 1950s where we, as an American people, feel called upon to hunt communists no matter where they may be in American life. And we'll literally, on college campuses, we will have people calling out college professors that they need to be fired because these college professors are teaching things that lead their students to become communists. God, is any of this familiar at all? Any college professor, any teacher, any member of the general public who questions aspects of American culture or American politics will be called out as communists. People will lose their jobs because of McCarthyism, which is this tendency to hunt out and hunt down potential communists throughout American life. I just want to reinforce again, we live in a country that was purported and proud to have a First Amendment that allowed the free expression of belief, the right to peaceful assembly, no matter where we are. And we will have violent mobs on college campuses denouncing communism, and we will have politicians who make their entire career about hunting down communists and ferreting them out of America. This is a very dark time for American politics and American culture. Think about that. Because you potentially have read a book that I don't like, I can call you out as a communist because you've read Karl Marx. I can call you out as a communist because you're a member of a labor union. People will be called out as communists because they are working for civil rights. Martin Luther King will be called a communist and a communist infiltrator because he's a leader of the civil rights movement, and the civil rights movement questions American policy towards African Americans in this country. That's how deep McCarthyism and this Red Scare at home will go. Unfortunately, there will be people caught up in this who perhaps are, we will catch real spies, we will catch real communists in our midst, but there will also be people caught up in all of this that will suffer through association. The Soviet Union will have its first successful attempt for an atomic bomb in 1949. We will immediately begin looking for people who are potentially spies for the Soviet Union and who may have leaked the design for the atomic bombs to the Soviets. The Rosenbergs, Julius and Ethel, will be arrested in 1949 for espionage. Ethel's brother worked at Los Alamos, the nuclear research facility that developed the atomic bomb. He'd also worked at places related to the atomic bomb in New Jersey. He's going to claim that he passed on secrets stolen from Los Alamos to Julius, who then passed these over to his Soviet handlers. Essentially, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg will be put on trial and convicted of spying, and they'll be executed by the electric chair in 1953. These are intellectuals who had worked in the atomic bomb research facility itself as well. There is still to this day a question of their innocence. Some people say that they may have been counteragents or spies who had been turned against their Soviet handlers. Some people say that this was all a McCarthy era witch hunt, and there was no real valid evidence put up against them. Some people still to this day the government did not make a mistake, could not make a mistake, and that these were obviously spies. But in 1953, we executed 2 American citizens for spying on the United States. And I can't give you an honest answer even today about whether or not the Rosenbergs were guilty. Ultimately, as I said, if you notice, as I said, Julius was the one who had supposedly had a communist spy as a handler, a Soviet spy as his handler. They executed his wife because his wife refused to give any evidence one way or the other. She stood by her husband. She claimed his innocence, so they tried her for being a spy as well. Think about what would happen if we had that happen in today's society. We have American citizens who have been caught fighting for the Taliban that have not been put to death. We have American citizens who have been captured fighting for ISIS, and they've been treated as enemy combatants. We have not executed them. That's how deep and dark this period of American history really goes. This is how influential this hunt for communists was. This is how damaging it was to American society, is that we were willing to execute people that may not have been conclusively proven to actually be spies. The bomb gets incredibly scary in the 1950s, especially the aspect that after 1949, the Russians have a bomb. When we're the only people in the world that have a bomb or an atomic weapon, it's a pretty powerful feeling. When all of a sudden we are confronted with the knowledge that the Russians, our mortal ideological enemies, have access to an atomic weapon, people look at this McCarthyism, they look at this House Un-American Activities Committee, they see American foreign policy, and honestly, we begin a de facto Cold War with the Soviet Union. We now push people to live in fear that you may die at any time from a nuclear weapon. People will build fallout shelters in their basement. People will stockpile food. People will watch films like Duck and Cover, which you can find on YouTube, that teach you what to do theoretically in the event of a nuclear attack. This is going to dominate American culture for the next several decades. Honestly, folks, I was born in the 70s. By the time the 80s come around and I can remember, we no longer do Duck and Cover, but we still had a sense of the threat of Russian nuclear weapons. We now fear a terrorist with a nuclear weapon, or we fear a rogue state with a nuclear weapon, but I don't know if that's actually a tangible threat to American society and American culture anymore. In the 50s, it's the honest belief that every human on the face of the earth is going to be wiped out with an atomic weapon. It's a very real, very tangible threat. And so what we're going to start seeing is that positivity towards science that I had talked about earlier with the House of Tomorrow is very quickly going to be turned around upon itself. Science brought us the atomic weapon. Science isn't necessarily always going to be good. We're going to start getting science fiction films that show science as a threat. The Blob, with Steve McQueen. It's a very cheesy horror movie about this gelatinous blob that kills and consumes everything in its path. This is one of these first scientific films that reject science, and science is looking for a way to kill you. I'm trying to think of there are other movies that come out in this same time. The Fly with Vincent Price. A man uses science to try and build a special teleportation machine, but instead turns himself into a hideous monster. Science is going to destroy us because it is uncontrolled and uncontrollable. It's also interesting at the same time we get the first big UFO scares in American culture. So America becomes a society shrouded in fear in the late 1950s. We very quickly turn from that very happy, very positive years of post-war culture to an unspeakable, constant dread that the Soviet Union is always around us. The fear of Soviet bombs and Soviet invasion is going to be our downfall. In all honesty, folks, this is the exact same message that the government of the Soviet Union is telling their people. I can't speak to the use of bomb shelters or stockpiled goods in Soviet society, but I can tell you that the message that the Soviet government was constantly giving to its people was that America was a menace. America was going to destroy the Soviet Union, and so we needed. If you live in the Soviet Union, you need to support the government and be strong in your beliefs because that will prevent America. Do everything for the government because that will prevent America from attacking. And honestly, that's the same message that we were telling people in the United States. And what we're going to start seeing is an arms race come out of this. As I mentioned, NSC 68 is going to promote the development of more and more nuclear weapons. This is the beginning of the arms race. And both sides will begin developing nuclear weapons at a breakneck pace and developing technology to be able to deliver those weapons into the heart of enemy countries or enemy allied countries. And all this is going on while Americans are supposed to be living a normal life, a very Leave It to Beaver lifestyle. If you want the idealized TV version of what American life was supposed to be like in this era, go on YouTube and watch Leave It to Beaver if your parents have never made you watch it before. It's a great statement on what we thought America was supposed to be. All right, that's enough negativity for today. Next week, we've only got 2 weeks of class left. I'm going to send you guys out a group email. I'm actually considering canceling exam 2, and we'll just have 2 examinations. I'll see what I can do about that, but we don't have, honestly, folks, we've got 2 weeks until the final. The errors and mistakes in the early portion of this class got things out of hand, and I don't really have the time right now with the exams that I'm giving and grading at other institutions to write an exam, and then I don't feel right about giving you guys an exam 2 weeks after that. So I'm going to send out an email. I want everybody's thoughts about an exam. So have a great weekend, and we'll get into the next 2 weeks. We're going to basically sum up the 60s through the 80s. We're going to talk about popular culture. We're going to talk about this Cold War over our head. And I've got one big movie assignment for you before the final. So I hope everybody has a great day.